Hello, 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 greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of greeting across this vast, marvelous multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horace, and welcome back, my wonderful, dear, perfect scholars, to the study. Hello there, hello there, hello there. Good to see you all here. Hello there, blah blah. Congratulations on getting first. Hello there, Sophia. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry to hear you're sick. I hope these stories, well, maybe not these stories, but some sort of stories will make you feel better. Hello there, Julian20. Welcome. Perfect. Blah blah. Horace always notices you. Hello there, Kanabo. Sophia. No fighting in the chat, please. You nap now. We'll get plenty of rest. Get plenty of rest, my dear, wonderful teacher. So then, hello there, my dear scholars, and welcome once again to the study. I hope you're all doing well. I understand you're sick, dear Sophia. I'm so sorry to hear that. How are all the rest of you doing this fine... What time is it, Horace? I've lost track. What time is it? Is it late? Oh, so some people, is it late for them? Okay, okay. So I'm not. I am correct in saying it's evening for some of them. Then. Okay. Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. So hello there. This fine evening, if you exist in that time zone. Mm. Oh, as for myself, it's been a rather tiring day. I don't know why. I feel absolutely drained. Maybe it's trying to continue manifesting in this form. It's so much easier to manifest in my other form than this. That sometimes bringing this awakened state, as I call it, can be a little bit taxing to the physical manifestations of my very ethos. Julian 20 blue is exhausting. Yes, it is. It is. It is. I mean, it's very exhausting just trying to hold back my true form so that I don't drive everyone here insane. I mean, that would not be good for you, my dear scholars. Let's be honest. But anyway, Kintron, too late. Oh no. Oh, I really don't want to drive anyone insane. I mean, I like you too much. I like you all too much. It's not much fun when you're insane. Hmm. But, like I said, I digress. Tonight, yes, tonight, we are having a reading stream. Oh my goodness, my dear scholars. Oh my goodness, another reading stream. What say you? Matsu doing a reading stream on Sunday? Insanity. Insanity. Utter pandemonium. Well, it's because, I will be gone. Gone on another journey elsewhere. Um, Gone. I wish I had hand movement tracking so you could see my wide hands out. Dramatic. Kintron, a reading stream from a library? Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I am going to be going on a journey this week, so I wanted to give you all a little bit of an extra reading stream for this week. So tonight we will be reading a few selected stories from author Ambrose Bierce. Now, who is Ambrose Bierce, you might be asking? Well, let me get my little book of people, a little identity book, and let's see. So, Ambrose Bierce, born June 24th, 1842 in Ohio. He was an American short story writer, journalist, poet, and an American Civil War veteran, which is very telling given that many of his stories revolve around the Civil War. Um, he was a very influential journalist, also a pioneering writer in what was called realist fiction here, but he also was well known for his horror stories. Um, he was sometimes nicknamed Old Gringo. Very much a cynical writer. He didn't have a lot of positive views on you mortals. Let's put it that way. Most mysteriously, though, is what happened to him towards the end. In 1913, he told a group of reporters that he was traveling to Mexico to get first-hand experience of the Mexican Revolution, and never came back. Nobody knows what ever happened to him. It's a mystery even to this day. Wait a minute, wait a minute. Horace, do you recall someone wandering in about, oh, I don't know how many, about several, maybe 100 years, less than that, someone wandering into the study, older man, called himself Andrew Rears, Andy Pierce, something like that, and just ended up wandering off into the depths of the study, and we never could find him again? Do you ever know what happened to that person? Yeah, I thought so. Uh, maybe it's best we don't think too hard on it. It might not have been the same person, but I don't think we want I don't think we want people to get the wrong idea about this place. Having famous authors wander into this place and just never come out again. Uh, but I digress again. You heard nothing. You absolutely heard nothing, scholars. Um, so I have picked a few stories. Um, Hopefully we can get to all of them tonight. I unfortunately won't be able to get to his most famous one, Kinshon. Forbidden sections are forbidden for a reason, folks. Yes, yes, the 666 dangerous rooms in the study are kept off limits for a reason. I should mention his most famous work was a short story, some of you might know this, called An Occurrence at Owl Creek. Many people have read that story. It's usually assigned often in schools. Um, it was adapted later into a short film in France, which won an Academy Award, and was later that film was shown on television as an episode of The Twilight Zone. Interesting. But again, we should probably get back. Now then, my dear scholars, are you ready for us to journey into the strange, the weird, the somewhat off-putting world of Ambrose Bierce? If so, sit back, relax, have a hot or cold beverage of your liking, bundle yourself up in blankets if you need to, and let us begin our reading. The Boarded Window. In 1830, only a few miles away from what is now the great city of Cincinnati, lay an immense and almost unbroken forest. The whole region was sparsely settled by people of the frontier. Yeah, I'm going to be doing it in this little accent for us. Thought it would be good for the mood of these stories. Was sparsely settled by people of the frontier. Restless souls who no sooner had hewn fairly habitable homes out of the wilderness and attained to that degree of prosperity which today we should call indigence, then, impelled by some mysterious impulse of their nature, they abandoned all and pushed further westward, to encounter new perils and privations in the effort to regain the meager comforts which they had voluntarily renounced. Many of them had already forsaken that region for the remoter settlements, but among those remaining was one who had been of those first arriving. He lived alone in a house of logs, surrounded on all sides by the great forest, of whose gloom and silence he seemed a part, for no one had ever known him to smile nor speak a needless word. His simple wants were supplied by the sale or barter of skins of wild animals in the river town, for not a thing did he grow upon the land which, if needful, he might have claimed by right of undisturbed possession. There were evidences of improvement. A few acres of ground immediately about the house had once been cleared of its trees, the decayed stumps of which were half concealed by the new growth that had been suffered to repair the ravage wrought by the axe. Apparently the man's zeal for agriculture had burned with a failing flame, expiring in penitent ashes. The little log house with its chimney of sticks, its roof of warping clapboards weighted with traversing poles, and its chinking of clay had a single door, and directly opposite, a window. The latter, however, was boarded up. Nobody could remember a time when it was not, and none knew why it was so closed. Certainly not because of the occupant's dislike of light or air, for on those rare occasions when a hunter had passed that lonely spot, the recluse had commonly been seen sunning himself on his doorstep, if heaven had provided sunshine for his need. I fancy there are a few persons living today who ever knew the secret of that window, but I am one, as you shall see. The man's name was said to be Murlock. He was apparently 70 years old, actually about 50. Something besides years had had a hand in his aging. His hair and long full beard were white, his gray lusterless eyes sunken, his face singularly seamed with wrinkles which appeared to belong to two intersecting systems. In figure he was tall and spare, with a stoop of the shoulders, a burden bearer. I never saw him. These particulars I learned from my grandfather, from whom also I got the man's story when I was a lad. He had known him when living near by in that early day. One day, Murlock was found in his cabin, dead. It was not a time and place for coroners and newspapers, and I suppose it was agreed that he had died from natural causes, or I should have been told, and should remember. I know only that with what was probably a sense of the fitness of things, the body was buried near the cabin, alongside the grave of his wife, who had preceded him by so many years that local tradition had retained hardly a hint of her existence. That closes the final chapter of this true story, excepting, indeed, the circumstances that many years afterward, in company with an equally intrepid spirit, I penetrated to the place, and ventured near enough to the ruined cabin to throw a stone against it, and ran away to avoid the ghost which every well-informed boy thereabout knew haunted the spot. But there is an earlier chapter, that supplied by my grandfather. When Murlock built his cabin and began laying sturdily about with his axe to hew out a farm, the rifle, meanwhile, his means of support, he was young, strong, and full of hope. In that eastern country whence he came, he had married, as was the fashion, a young woman in all ways worthy of his honest devotion, who shared the dangers and privations of his lot with a willing spirit and light heart. There is no known record of her name. Of her charms of mind and person tradition is silent, and the doubter is at liberty to entertain his doubt. But God forbid that I should share it. Of their affection and happiness there is abundant assistance in every added day of the man's widowed life. For what but the magnetism of a blessed memory could have chained that venturous spirit to a lot like that? One day, Murlock returned from gunning in a distant part of the forest to find his wife prostrate with fever and delirious. There was no physician within miles, no neighbor, nor was she in a condition to be left to summon help. So he set about the task of nursing her back to health. But at the end of the third day, she fell into unconsciousness, and so passed away, apparently with never a gleam of returning reason. Oh, that's really sad. That's horrible. I suppose back then it would be difficult for anyone to get out that far. I mean, they didn't have cars, automobiles, transporters, teleporters, none of that. So if you were in some sort of danger, that was it. You were stuck there. From what we know of a nature like his, we may venture to sketch in some of the details the outline picture drawn by my grandfather. When convinced that she was dead, Murlock had sense enough to remember that the dead must be prepared for burial. In performance of this sacred duty, he blundered now and again, did certain things incorrectly, and others which he did correctly were done over and over. His occasional failings to accomplish some simple and ordinary act filled him with astonishment, like that of a drunken man who wonders at the suspension of familiar natural laws. He was surprised, too, that he did not weep. Surprised and a little ashamed. Surely it is unkind not to weep for the dead. "Tomorrow," he said aloud, "I shall have to make the coffin and dig the grave, and then I shall miss her when she is no longer inside. But now she is dead, of course, but it is all right. It must be all right somehow. Things cannot be so bad as they seem." He stood over the body in the fading light, adjusting the hair and putting the finishing touches to the simple toilet. That they mean makeup, by the way, my dear scholars, not that sort. Oh, oh my goodness. 1 second, my dear scholars. 1 second. Goodness. Goodness, what the um, okay, Ovid, Virgil, we've got it handled. Thank you so much. Thank you. Horace, remind me next time to double check everything I do before I start my streams. Sorry about that, my dear scholars. It's usually a good idea that before you start a stream, that your conveyance of streaming, to make sure that it is actually plugged in. Mm. Anyway, sorry about that little interruption. Now then, where were we? Oh yes, the dead body. Voice. He stood over the body in the fading light, adjusting the hair and putting the finishing touches to the simple toilet, doing all mechanically with soulless care. And still, though, through his consciousness ran an undersense of conviction that all was right. They should have her again as before, and everything explained. He had, he had had no experience in grief. His capacity had not been enlarged by use. His heart could not contain it all, nor his imagination rightly conceive it. He did not know he was so hard struck. That knowledge would come later, and never go. Grief is an artist of powers as various as the instruments upon which he plays his dirges for the dead, invoking from some the sharpest, shrillest notes, from others the low, grave chords that throb recurrent like the slow beating of a distant drum. Some natures it startles, some it stupefies. To one it comes like the stroke of an arrow, stinging all the sensibilities to a keener life. To another as the blow of a bludgeon, which in crushing benumbs. We may conceive Murlock to have been that way afflicted, for, and here we are upon surer ground than that of conjecture, no sooner had he finished his pious work than, sinking into a chair by the side of the table upon which the body lay, and noting how white the profile showed in the deepening gloom, he laid his arms upon the table's edge, and dropped his face into them, tearless yet, and unutterably weary. At that moment came in through the open window a long, wailing sound, like the cry of a lost child, in the far deeps of the darkening woods. But the man did not move. Again and nearer than before sounded that unearthly cry upon his failing sense. Perhaps it was a wild beast. Perhaps it was a dream. For Murlock was asleep. Some hours later, as it afterward appeared, this unfaithful watcher awoke, and lifting his head from his arms, intently listened. He knew not why. There, in the black darkness by the side of the dead, recalling all without a shock, he strained his eyes to see. He knew not what. His senses were all alert. His breath was suspended. His blood had stilled its tides as if to assist the silence. Who? What had waked him? And where was it? Suddenly, the table shook beneath his arms, and at the same moment he heard, or fancied that he heard, a light, soft step. Another. Sounds as of bare feet upon the floor. He was terrified beyond the power to cry out or move. Perforce he waited there in the darkness through seemingly centuries of such dread as one may know, yet live to tell. He tried vainly to speak the dead woman's name, vainly to stretch forth his hand across the table to learn if she was there. His throat was powerless. His arms and hands were like lead. Then occurred something most frightful. Some heavy body seemed hurled against the table with an impetus that pushed it against his breast so sharply as nearly to overthrow him. And at the same instant he heard and felt the fall of something upon the floor with so violent a thump that the whole house was shaken by the impact. A scuffling ensued, and a confusion of sounds impossible to describe. Murlock had risen to his feet. Fear had by excess forfeited control of his faculties. He flung his hands upon the table. Nothing was there. There is a point at which terror may turn to madness, and madness incites to action. With no definite intent, from no motive but the wayward impulse of a madman, Murlock sprang to the wall with a little groping, seized his loaded rifle, and without aim discharged it. By the flash which lit up the room with a vivid illumination, he saw an enormous panther dragging the dead woman towards the window, its teeth fixed in her throat. Then there was darkness, blacker than before, and silence. And when he returned to consciousness, the sun was high and the wood vocal with songs of birds. The body lay near the window, where the beast had left it when frightened away by the flash and report of the rifle. The clothing was deranged, the long hair in disorder, the limbs lay anyhow. From the throat, dreadfully lacerated, had issued a pool of blood not yet entirely congealed. The ribbon with which he had bound the wrists was broken. The hands were tightly clenched. Between the teeth was a fragment of the animal's ear. Oh my goodness. Short, but oh my goodness. Wow. That's not something you want to realize or witness, my dear scholars. Oh my goodness. Stunned silence I can see from my dear scholars. Mm. I uh I don't I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I mean, after all, how would you feel to realize your dead wife might not have been as dead as you thought she was? Oh my goodness, that is horrifying. That is absolutely horrifying. Alien 20 horrified. Yes, yes. I mean, no wonder the man afterwards became so kid-shot. That would be a but oops. Yes, yes. Um, I have heard an adaptation of this in radio, which went in an interesting direction in melding the two events by having someone passing by the cabin and witnessing these events as sort of a ghostly playback. It was an interesting version too. It had this little bit of the idea of you see the present and then you see the past and it merges together. Because here's the thing with Ambrose Bierce's stories, and we'll get to one of the ones a little bit later as an example, one of the more famous ones. They're not always in chronological order the way he tells them. By the way, my dear scholars, do you want me to keep doing the readings in that accent, or should I go back to my regular, wonderful voice? What say you? Do you want the accent or no accent? Helium 20. Oh, I love the accent. I mean, it's quite fun, let's be honest. Helium 20, it brings color to the story. Well, I was choosing the accent because they are written as you know, of that frontier. I'll make sure, Kinchon, accent is good, just make sure you don't mess up your voice. Tell you what, I won't do all these stories in accent. Some of them I'll do in my regular voice to make it easier on me. Okay, so let's move on to our next story then. John Barteen's Watch, a story by a physician. The exact time. Good God, my friend, why do you insist? One would think, what does it matter? It is easily bedtime. Isn't that near enough? But here, if you must set your watch, take mine and see for yourself. With that, he detached his watch, a tremendously heavy old-fashioned one, from the chain and handed it to me, then turned away and walking across the room to a shelf of books began an examination of their backs. His agitation and evident distress surprised me. They appeared reasonless. Having set my watch by his, I stepped over to where he stood and said, "Thank you." As he took his timepiece and reattached it to the guard, I observed that his hands were unsteady. With a tact upon which I greatly prided myself, I sauntered carelessly to the sideboard and took some brandy and water, and then begging his pardon for my thoughtlessness, asked him to have some and went back to my seat by the fire, leaving him to help himself, as was our custom. He did so, and presently joined me at the hearth, as tranquil as ever. This odd little incident occurred in my apartment, where John Bartine was passing an evening. We had dined together at the club, had come home in a cab, and in short, everything had been done in the most prosaic way. And why John Bartine should break in upon the natural and established order of things to make himself spectacular with a display of motion, apparently for his own entertainment, I could not, I could no wise understand. The more I thought of it, while his brilliant conversational gifts were commending themselves to my inattention, the more curious I grew, and of course had no difficulty in persuading myself that my curiosity was friendly solicitude. That is the disguise that curiosity usually assumes to invade resentment. So I ruined one of the finest sentences of his disregarded monologue by cutting it short without ceremony. "John Bartine," I said, "you must try to forgive me if I am wrong, but with the light that I have at present, I cannot concede your right to go all to pieces when asked the time of night. I cannot admit that it is proper to experience a mysterious reluctance to look your own watch in the face, and to cherish in my presence, without explanation, painful emotions which are denied to me and which are none of my business." To this ridiculous speech Bartine made no immediate reply, but sat looking gravely into the fire. Fearing that I had offended, I was about to apologize and beg him to think no more about the matter, when looking me calmly in the eyes, he said, "My dear fellow, the levity of your manner does not at all disguise the hideous impudence of your demands. But happily I had already decided to tell you what you wish to know, and no manifestation of your unworthiness to hear it shall alter my decision. Be good enough to give me your attention, and you shall hear all about the matter." "This watch," he said, "had been in my family for 3 generations before it fell to me. Its original owner, for whom it was made, was my great-grandfather, Bramwell Ollicott Bartine, a wealthy planter of colonial Virginia, and as staunch a Tory as ever lay awake nights contriving new kinds of maledictions for the head of Mr. Washington, and new methods of aiding and abetting good King George." That must be a bit of an embarrassment for his family. "One day this worthy gentleman had the deep misfortune to perform for his cause a service of capital importance, which was not recognized as legitimate by those who suffered its disadvantages. It does not matter what it was, but among its minor consequences was my excellent ancestor's arrest one night in his own house by a party of Mr. Washington's rebels. He was permitted to say farewell to his weeping family, and was then marched away into the darkness, which swallowed him up forever. Not the slenderest clue to his fate was ever found. After the war, the most diligent inquiry and the offer of large rewards failed to turn up any of his captors, or any fact concerning his disappearance. He had disappeared, And that was all. Something in Bartine's manner that was not in his words, I hardly knew what it was, prompted me to ask, "What is your view of the matter? Of the justice of it?" "My view of it!" he flamed out, bringing his clenching hand down upon the table as if he had been in a public house dicing with the blackguards. "My view of it is that it was a characteristically dastardly assassination by that damned traitor Washington and his ragamuffin rebels." Okay, someone's holding a grudge. For some minutes nothing was said. Bartine was recovering his temper, and I waited. Then I said, "Was that all?" "No, there was something else. A few weeks after my great-grandfather's arrest, his watch was found lying on the porch at the front door of his dwelling. It was wrapped in a sheet of letter paper bearing the name of Rupert Bartine, his only son, my grandfather. I am wearing that watch." Bartine paused. His usual restless black eyes were staring fixedly into the grate, a point of red light in each reflected from the glowing coals. He seemed to have forgotten me. A sudden threshing of the branches of a tree outside one of the windows, and almost at the same instant a rattle of rain against the glass, recalled him to a sense of his surroundings. A storm had risen, heralded by a single gust of wind, and in a few moments the steady plash of the water on the pavement was distinctly heard. I hardly know why I relate this incident. It seems somehow to have a certain significance and relevancy which I am unable now to discern. It at least added an element of seriousness, almost solemnity. Bartine resumed, "I have a singular feeling towards this watch, a kind of affection for it. I like to have it about me, though partially from its weight and partially for a reason I shall now explain. I seldom carry it. The reason is this. Every evening when I have it with me I feel an unaccountable desire to open and consult it, even if I can think of no reason for wishing to know the time. But if I yield to it, the moment my eyes rest upon the dial I am filled with a mysterious apprehension, a sense of immediate calamity. And this is the more insupportable the nearer it is to 11 o'clock. By this watch, no matter what the actual hour may be, after the hands have registered 11, the desire to look is gone. I am entirely indifferent. Then I can consult the thing as often as I like, with no more emotion than you feel in looking at your own. Naturally, I have trained myself not to look at that watch in the evening before 11. Nothing could induce me. Your insistence this evening upset me a trifle. I felt very much as I suppose an opium eater might feel if his yearning for his special and particular kind of hell were reinforced by opportunity and vice. Now this is my story, and I have told it in the interest of your trumpety science. But if on any evening hereafter you observe me wearing this damnable watch, and you have the thoughtfulness to ask me the hour, I shall beg leave to put you to the inconvenience of being knocked down." His humor did not amuse me. I could see in relaying his delusion he was again somewhat disturbed. His concluding smile was positively ghastly, and his eyes had resumed something more than their old restlessness. They shifted hither and thither about the room with apparent aimlessness, and I fancied had taken on a wild expression, such as is sometimes observed in cases of dementia. Perhaps this was my own imagination, but at any rate I was now persuaded that my friend was afflicted with a most singular and interesting monomania. Without, I trust, any abatement of my affectionate solicitude for him as a friend, I began to regard him as a patient rich in possibilities of profitable study. Why not? Had he not described his delusion in the interest of science? Ah, poor fellow, he was doing more for science than he knew. Not only his story, but himself was in evidence. I should cure him if I could, of course, but first I should make a little experiment in psychology. Nay, the experiment itself might be a step in his restoration. That is very frank and friendly of you, Bartine, I said cordially, and I'm rather proud of your confidence. It is very odd, certainly. Do you mind showing me the watch? He detached it from his waistcoat chain and all, and passed it to me without a word. The case was of gold, very thick and strong, and singularly engraved. After closely examining the dial and observing that it was nearly 12 o'clock, I opened it at the back, and was interested to observe an inner case of ivory, upon which was painted a miniature portrait in that exquisite and delicate manner which was in vogue during the 18th century. Why, bless my soul! I exclaimed, feeling a sharp artistic delight. How under the sun did you get that done? I thought miniature painting on ivory was a lost art. That, he replied, gravely smiling, is not I. It is my excellent great-grandfather, the late Bromwell Alcott Bartine, Esquire of Virginia. He was younger than that. Yeah, he was younger than later, about my age, in fact. It is said to resemble me. Do you think so? Resemble you? I should say so, barring the costume which I suppose you to have assumed out of compliance to the art, or for some verisemblance, so to say, and the no mustache. That portrait is you in every feature, line, and expression. No more was said at that time. Bartine took a book from the table and began reading. I heard foot I heard outside the incessant plash of the rain in the street. There was occasional hurried footfalls on the sidewalks, and once a slower, heavier tread seemed to cease at my door. A policeman, I thought, seeking shelter in the doorway. The boughs of the trees tapped significantly on the window panes, as if asking for admittance. I remember it all through these years and years of a wiser, graver life. Seeing myself unobserved, I took the old-fashioned key that dangled from the chain and quickly turned back the hands of the watch a full hour. Then, closing the case, I handed Bartine his property, and saw him replace it on his person. Oh, I don't like the sound of this. I think you said, I began with assumed carelessness, that after 11 the sight of the dial no longer affects you. As it is nearly as it as it is now nearly 12, looking at my own timepiece, perhaps if you don't resent my pursuit of proof, you will look at it now. He smiled good-humoredly, pulled out the watch again, opened it, and instantly sprang to his feet with a cry that heaven had not had the mercy to permit me to forget. His eyes, their blackness strikingly intensified by the pallor of his face, was fixed upon the watch which he clutched in both hands. For some time he remained in that attitude without uttering another sound. Then, in a voice that I should not have recognized as his, he said, "Damn you! It is 2 minutes to 11!" I was not unprepared for some such outbreak, and without rising replied calmly enough, "I beg your pardon, I must have misread your watch in setting my own by it." He shut the case with a sharp snap and put the watch in his pocket. He looked at me and made an attempt to smile, but his lower lip quivered, and he seemed unable to close his mouth. His hands also were shaking, and he thrust them clenched into the pockets of his sack coat. The courageous spirit was manifestly endeavoring to subdue the coward body. The effort was too great. He began to sway from side to side as from vertigo, and before I could spring from my chair to support him, his knees gave way, and he pitched awkwardly forward and fell upon his face. I sprang to assist him to rise, but when John Bartine rises, we shall all rise. The post-mortem examination disclosed nothing. Every organ was normal and sound. But when the body had been prepared for burial, a faint dark circle was seen to have developed around the neck. At least I was so assured by several persons who said they saw it. But of my own knowledge, I could not say if that was true. Nor can I set limitations to the laws of heredity. I do not know that in the spiritual world a sentiment or emotion may not survive the heart that held it, and seek expression in a kindred life, ages removed. Surely, if I were to guess at the fate of Bromwell Olcott Bartine, I should guess that he was hanged at 11 o'clock in the evening, and that he had been allowed several hours in which to prepare for the change. As for John Bartine, my friend, my patient for 5 minutes, and heaven forgive me, my victim for eternity, there is no more to say. He is buried, and his watch with him. I saw to that. May God rest his soul in paradise, and the soul of his Virginian ancestor, if indeed they are two souls. Oh, ooh. You would think that he would have thought better than to try and toy around with his friend's watch like that if his friend was showing, that he was feeling rather uncomfortable about it. But of course, no, this guy had to be really arrogant and decide to do things like this himself, and yeah. What a horrible way to go. What a horrible end. Alien 20, that was emotional. Yes, yes, it was emotional. It was an emotional tale. Okay, let's see. So the next story may be the last one. We'll see. And it's a long one. It's a longer one. It's also perhaps Ambrose next to two of Ambrose Bierce's other stories, which were an occurrence at Owl Creek and the damnable thing. Oh, thank you for the posture check, Julian 20. This next story is probably Ambrose Bierce's most famous, and it's his most clearly written ghost story. It's a longer one too, so it might be our last one. This story is called The Middle Toe of the Right Foot. It is well known that the old Manton house is haunted. In all the rural district near about, and even in the town of Marshall, a mile away, not one person of unabased mind entertains a doubt of it. Incredulity is confined to those opinionated persons who will be called cranks as soon as the useful word shall have penetrated the intellectual demesnes of the martial advance. The evidence that the house is haunted is of two kinds: the testimony of disinterested witnesses who have had ocular proof, and that of the house itself. The former may be disregarded and ruled out on any of the various grounds of objection which may be urged against it by the ingenious, but facts within the observation of all are material and controlling. Unit 20. Say what? Yes, indeed. It's the title. The middle toe of the right foot. In the first place, the Manton house has been unoccupied by mortals for more than 10 years, and with its outbuilding is slowly falling into decay, a circumstance which in itself the judicious will hardly venture to ignore. It stands a little way off the loneliest reach of the Marshall and Hairston road, in an opening which was once a farm, and is still disfigured with stripes of rotting fence and half covered with brambles, overrunning a stony and sterile soil long unacquainted with the plough. The house itself is in tolerably good condition, though badly weather-stained and in dire need of attention from the glazier, the smaller male population of the region having attested in the manner of its kind its disapproval of dwelling without dwellers. It is 2 stories in height, nearly square, its front pierced by a single doorway, flanked on each side by a window boarded up to the very top. Corresponding windows above, not protected, serve to admit light and rain to the rooms of the upper floor. Grass and weeds grow pretty rankly all about, and a few shade trees, somewhat the worse for wind, and leaning all in one direction, seem to be making a concerted effort to run away. In short, as the Marshalltown humorist explained in the columns of the Advance, the proposition that the Manton house is badly haunted is the only logical conclusion from the premises. The fact that in this dwelling Mr. Manton thought it expedient one night some 10 years ago to rise and cut the throats of his wife and 2 small children, removing at once to another part of the country, has no doubt done its share in directing public attention to the fitness of the place for supernatural phenomena. To this house one summer evening came 4 men in a wagon. 3 of them promptly alighted, and the one who had been driving hitched the team to the only remaining post of what had been a fence. The 4th remained seated in the wagon. "Come," said one of his companions, approaching him, while the others moved away in the direction of the dwelling. "This is the place." The man addressed did not move. "By God," he said harshly, "this is a trick, and it looks to me as if you were in it." "Perhaps I am," the other said, looking him straight in the face. I'm going to drop the accent for this. And speaking in a tone which had something of contempt in it. You will remember, however, that the choice of place was with your own assent left to the other side. Of course, if you are afraid of spooks—" "I'm afraid of nothing," the man interrupted with another oath, and sprang to the ground. The 2 then joined the others at the door, which one of them had already opened with some difficulty, caused by rust of lock and hinge. All entered. Inside it was dark, but the man who had unlocked the door produced a candle and matches and made a light. He then unlocked a door on their right as they stood in the passage. This gave them entrance to a large square room that the candle but dimly lighted. The floor had a thick carpeting of dust, which partially muffled their footfalls. Cobwebs were in the angles of the walls, and depended from the ceiling like strips of rotted lace, making unduly movements in the disturbed air. The room had two windows in adjoining sides, but from neither could anything be seen except the rough inner surfaces of boards, a few inches from the glass. There was no fireplace, no furniture. There was nothing. Besides the cobwebs and the dust, the four men were the only objects there which were not a part of the structure. Strange enough they looked in the yellow light of the candle. The one who had so reluctantly lighted was especially spectacular. He might have been called sensational. He was of middle age, heavily built, deep-chested, and broad-shouldered. Looking at his figure, one would have said that he had a giant's strength. At his features, that he would use it like a giant. He was clean-shaven, his hair rather close-cropped and gray. His low forehead was seamed with wrinkles above the eyes, and over the nose these became vertical. The heavy black brows followed the same law, saved from meeting only by an upward turn at what would otherwise have been the point of contact. Deeply sunken beneath these glowed in the obscure light a pair of eyes of uncertain color, but obviously enough too small. There was something forbidding in their expression, which was not bettered by the cruel mouth and wide jaw. The nose was well enough, as noses go. One does not expect much of noses. All these was sinister in the man's face, seemed accentuated by the unnatural pallor. He appeared altogether bloodless. The appearance of the other men were sufficiently commonplace. They were such persons as one meets and forgets that he met. All were younger than the man described, between whom and the eldest of the others, who stood apart, there was apparently no kindly feeling. They avoided looking at each other. "Gentlemen," said the man holding the candle and keys, "I believe everything is right. Are you ready, Mr. Roser?" The man standing apart from the group bowed and smiled. "And you, Mr. Grossmith?" The heavy man bowed and scowled. "You will be pleased to remove your outer clothing." Their hats and coats, waistcoats, and neckwear were soon removed and thrown outside the door in the passage. The man with the candle now nodded, and the fourth man, he who had urged Grossmith to leave the wagon, produced from the pocket of his overcoat two long, murderous-looking bowie knives, which he drew now from their leather scabbards. "They are exactly alike," he said, presenting one to each of the two principals, for by this time the dullest observer would have understood the nature of this meeting. It was to be a duel to the death. Each combatant took a knife, examined it critically near the candle, and tested the strength of the blade and handle across his lifted knee. Their persons were then searched in turn, each by the second or the other. "If it is agreeable to you, Mr. Grossmith," said the man holding the light, "you will place yourself in that corner." He indicated the angle of the room farthest from the door, whither Grossmith retired, his second parting from him with a grasp of the hand, which had nothing of cordiality in it. In the angle nearest the door, Mr. Roser stationed himself, and after a whispered consultation his second left him, joining the others near the door. At that moment the candle was suddenly extinguished, leaving all in profound darkness. This may have been done by a draught from the open door. Whatever the cause, the effect was startling. "Gentlemen," said a voice which sounded strangely unfamiliar in the altered condition affecting the relations of the senses, "gentlemen, you will not move until you hear the closing of the outer door." A sound of trampling ensued, then the closing of the inner door, and Finally, the outer one closed with a concussion which shook the entire building. A few minutes afterward, a belated farmer's boy met a light wagon, which was being driven furiously towards the town of Marshall. He declared that behind the two figures on the front seat stood a third with its hands upon the bowed shoulders of the others, who appeared to struggle vainly to free themselves from its grasp. This figure, unlike the others, was clad in white, and had undoubtedly boarded the wagon as it passed the haunted house. As the lad could boast a considerable former experience with the supernatural thereabouts, his word had the weight justly due to the testimony of an expert. The story, in connection with the next day's events, eventually appeared in the Advance, with some slight literary embellishments and a concluding intimation that the gentleman referred to would be allowed the use of the paper's columns for their version of the night's adventure, but the privilege remained without a claimant. The events that led up to this duel in the dark were simple enough. One evening, three young men of the town of Marshall were sitting in a quiet corner of the porch of the village hotel, smoking and discussing such matters as three educated young men of a southern village would naturally find interesting. Their names were King, Sancher, and Rocher. At a little distance, within easy hearing, but taking no part in the conversation, sat a fourth. He was a stranger to the others. They merely knew that on his arrival by the stagecoach that afternoon he had written in the hotel register the name Robert Grossmith. He had not been observed to speak to anyone except the hotel clerk. He seemed indeed singularly fond of his own company, or as the personnel of the Advance expressed it, grossly addicted to evil associations. But then it should be said in justice to the stranger that the personnel was himself of a too convivial disposition fairly to judge one differently gifted, and had moreover experienced a slight rebuff in an effort at an interview. "I hate any kind of deformity in a woman," said King, "whether natural or acquired. I have a theory that any physical defect has its correlation mental and moral defect." Oh my goodness, that's harsh. My dear scholars, I do not condone what this man says. Just know that. I infer then, said Roser gravely, that a lady lacking the moral advantage of a nose would find the struggle to become Mrs. King an arduous enterprise. "Of course you may put it that way," was the reply. "But seriously, I once threw over a most charming girl on learning quite accidentally that she had suffered amputation of a toe. My conduct was brutal, if you like, but if I had married that girl I should have been miserable for life, and should have made her so." "Whereas," said Sancher, with a light laugh, "by marrying a gentleman of more liberal views she escaped with a parted throat." "Ah, you know to whom I refer. Yes, she married Manton, but I don't know about his liberality. I'm not sure but he cut her throat because he discovered that she lacked that excellent thing in women, the middle toe of the right foot." "Look at that chap," said Roser in a low voice, his eyes fixed upon the stranger. That chap was obviously listening intently to the conversation. "Damn his impudence," muttered King. "What ought we to do?" "That's an easy one," Roser replied, rising. "Sir," he continued, addressing the stranger, "I think it would be better if you would remove your chair to the other end of the veranda. The presence of gentlemen is evidently an unfamiliar situation to you." The man sprang to his feet and strode forward with clenched hands, his face white with rage. All were now standing. Sancher stepped between the belligerents. "You are hasty and unjust," he said to Roser. "This gentleman has done nothing to deserve such language." But Roser would not withdraw a word. By the custom of the country and the time, there could be but one outcome to the quarrel. Wow, this is really a rough place. "I demand the satisfaction due to a gentleman," said the stranger, who had become more calm. I have not an acquaintance in this region. Perhaps you, sir," bowing to Sancher, "will be kind enough to represent me in this matter." Sancher accepted the trust, somewhat reluctantly, it must be confessed, for the man's appearance and manner were not at all to his liking. King, who during the colloquy had hardly removed his eyes from the stranger's face, and had not spoken a word, consented with a nod to an act for Roser, and the upshot of it was that the principals having retired, a meeting was arranged for the next evening. The nature of the arrangement had been already disclosed. The duel with knives in a dark room was once a commoner feature of southwestern life than it is likely to be again. How thin a veneer of chivalry covered the essential brutality of the code under which such encounters were possible, we shall see. In the blaze of a midsummer noonday, the old Manton house was hardly true to its traditions. It was of the earth, earthy. The sunshine caressed it warmly and affectionately, with evident disregard of its bad reputation. The grass screening all the expanse in its front seemed to grow, not rankly, but with a natural and joyous exuberance. And the weeds blossomed quite like plants, full of charming lights and shadows, and populous with pleasant-voiced birds. The neglected shade trees no longer struggled to run away, but bent reverently beneath their burdens of sun and song. Even in the glassless upper windows was an expression of peace and contentment, due to the light within. Over the stony fields the visible heat danced with a lively tremor, incompatible with the gravity which is an attribute of the supernatural. Such was the aspect under which the place presented itself to Sheriff Adams and two other men who had come out from Marshall to look at it. One of these men was Mr. King, the sheriff's deputy. The other, whose name was Brewer, was a brother of the late Mrs. Manton. Under a beneficiate law of the state relating to property which had been for a certain period abandoned by an owner whose residence cannot be ascertained, the sheriff was legal custodian of the Manton farm, and appearances thereunto belonging. His present visit was in mere perfunctory compliance with some order of a court, in which Mr. Brewer had an action to get possession of the property as heir to his deceased sister. By a mere coincidence, the visit was made on the day after the night that Deputy King had unlocked the house for another and very different purpose. His presence now was not of his own choosing. He had been ordered to accompany his superior, and at the moment could think of nothing more prudent than simulated alacrity in obedience to the command. Carelessly opening the front door, which to his surprise was not locked, the sheriff was amazed to see lying on the floor of the passage in which it opened a confused heap of men's apparel. Examination showed it to consist of 2 hats and the same number of coats, waistcoats, and scarves, all in a remarkable good state of preservation, albeit somewhat defiled by the dust in which they lay. Mr. Brewer was equally astonished, but Mr. King's emotion is not of record. With a new and lively interest in his own actions, the sheriff now unlatched and pushed open a door on the right, and the three entered. The room was apparently vacant. No. As their eyes became accustomed to the dimmer light, something was visible in the farthest angle of the wall. It was a human figure, that of a man crouching close in the corner. Something in the attitude made the intruders halt when they had barely passed the threshold. The figure more and more clearly defined itself. The man was upon one knee, his back in the angle of the wall, his shoulders elevated to the level of his ears, his hands before his face, palms outward, the fingers spread and crooked like claws, the white face turned upward on the retracted neck, had an expression of unutterable fright. The mouth half open, the eyes incredibly expanded. He was stone dead. Yet, with the exception of a bowie knife, which had evidently fallen from his own hand, not another object was in the room. In thick dust that covered the floor was some confused footprints near the door, and along the wall through which it opened. Along one of the adjoining walls, too, past the boarded-up window, was the trail made by the man himself in reaching his corner. Instinctively, in approaching the body, the three men followed that trail. The sheriff grasped one of the outthrown arms. It was as rigid as iron, and the application of a gentle force rocked the entire body without altering the relation of its parts. Brewer, pale with excitement, gazed intently into the distorted face. "God of mercy!" he suddenly cried. "It is Manton. You were right, you are right," said King with an evident attempt at calmness. "I knew Manton. He then wore a full beard and his hair long, but this is he. So that guy who challenged what was it? What was his name? Grossmith. He was actually Manton. Oh my goodness." He might have added, "I recognized him when he challenged Roser. I told Roser and Sancher who he was before he played him this horrible trick. When Roser left this dark room at our heels, forgetting his outer clothing in the excitement, and driving away with us in his shirt sleeves, all through the discernible proceedings we knew whom we were dealing with, murderer and coward that he was." But nothing of this did Mr. King say. With his better light he was trying to penetrate the mystery of the man's death. That he had not once moved from the corner where he had been stationed, that his posture was that of neither attack nor defense, that he had dropped his weapon, that he had obviously perished of sheer horror of something that he saw. These were circumstances which Mr. King's disturbed intelligence could not rightly comprehend. Groping in intellectual darkness for a clue to his maze of doubt, his gaze, directed mechanically downward in the way of one who ponders momentous matters, fell upon something which there, in the light of day, and in the presence of living companions, affected him with terror. In the dust of years that lay thick upon the floor, leading from the door by which they had entered, straight across the room to within a yard of Manton's crouching corpse, were three parallel lines of footprints. Light but definite impressions of bare feet. The outer ones, those of small children. The inner, a woman's. From the point at which they ended, they did not return. They pointed all one way. Brewer, who had observed them at the same moment, was leaning forward in an attitude of rapt attention, horribly pale. "Look at that!" he cried, pointing with both hands at the nearest print of the woman's right foot, where she had apparently stopped and stood. "The middle toe is missing. It was Gertrude." Gertrude was the late Mrs. Manton, sister to Mr. Brewer. Well, now, I think you would call that justice from beyond the grave, wouldn't you say? Mm, quite a little spooky event there. Nearly 20. Oh my. Yes, yes, indeed. Um, I would read another story, but I can feel my voice feeling a little bit worn out already. Oh my goodness. And the only other one I've got is a bit longer. So I think we shall actually stop at this point for this evening. So, Ambrose Bierce, oh my goodness. I have never gotten to read any of his stories, but you can see the sort of stories he wrote. They have a touch of that americana, don't they? Union 20, save it for next time. Yes, save my voice for next time. Touch of that americana, don't they? A little bit of roughness in them. Not very delicate tales. Um, it's kind of a shame I wasn't able to read some of the later ones, such as The Damnable Thing, which is his most famous one, and unfortunately was adapted into a fairly bad film adaptation. Um, and of course I skipped an occurrence at Owl Creek because everyone knows that story. Everyone knows an occasion at Owl Creek. So these ones though we're really excited to read. I mean, the last one especially I wanted very badly to read. The right, the middle toe of the right foot. That one was one that was particularly spooky, and I really wanted to end the night on that one. So this week, the rest of this week, Tuesday, we will be continuing our playing of Amnesia, which I am loving. I am really enjoying that one. It's been a lot of fun. But sadly, after that, we are going to be going on a break. Um, Next week, though, I will be having some special videos which will be playing on YouTube. Please check them out on Tuesday and Thursday. As per usual, they're a bit longer videos than my usual shorts, so they're not shorts from the study. They're going to be a bit longer. I choose a game is what 5? I don't understand. I could go. Oh, you have a goal. Oh, oh my goodness. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to this. Um, but yes, there will be some videos the week after next, after this week. Please check them out. My YouTube channel, just search under Matsu Quinox. My YouTube channel is where you can find my previous VODs, as well as some shorts from the study, and some other special videos which I have recorded. Um, and please, if you want to comment along to the videos playing, you are free to do so. I always enjoy hearing back from my dear scholars on how my videos are doing. But yes, I digress. So, and then the week after, when I come back, you know what? I might as well announce it. Week after, I will be reading one of the classic Eldritch Abomination novels, The Great God Pan. I'm I'm kind of excited to read this. Never read it. It's going to be an interesting read. Very different. Um, and then we will be having a special Halloween stream. So look forward to that. Special extra long one because it's Halloween. You know, you gotta do something for Halloween. Um, but as for now, I think we should check out who we can visit. Let us see. Who can we raid tonight? Oh, well, here's someone we haven't raided in a while. Let's visit Alchemist. We haven't raided her in a long time. So, my dear scholars, I say unto you, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, till we meet each other again at the study. Take care, and I shall see you next time. Till then, farewell and bye bye.